There is something uniquely haunting about watching a man the world once saw as indestructible grow older in plain sight. Not because he is broken, not because he has fallen, but because time does what no critic, no scandal, and no box office failure ever could. It strips away the illusion that legends are somehow immune to loss. And at 75, Kurt Russell does not look like a man destroyed by Hollywood. He looks like something far more emotional than that. He looks like a man who survived it. For younger audiences, Kurt Russell may be a screen veteran with the voice, the swagger, and that unmistakable old-school charisma. But long before he became Snake Plissken, Wyatt Earp, or the weathered force audiences remember from later decades, he was a boy inside the Disney machine. Walt Disney himself signed Russell to an exclusive studio contract after casting him in Follow Me Boys, and Kurt went on to become one of the studio's defining young stars, appearing in films like The Computer Wore Tennis Shoes, and a long run of family pictures that made him look like the safest bet in America. He was not built as a rebel at first. He was built as a promise. The golden kid, the dependable face, the boy who seemed destined to remain forever protected by the glow of Hollywood innocence. But that is not the whole story, because acting was not the only life Kurt Russell wanted. For a long time, baseball was not a hobby on the side. It was the other future. He played minor league baseball while acting, and for a while, it looked like he might really make that world his own. Then, in 1973, he tore his rotator cuff, and that injury effectively ended his baseball career. That kind of loss does not make headlines the way a divorce does. It does not earn tabloid covers. But sometimes, the deepest heartbreak in a life is not losing what you had. It is losing the version of yourself you were still becoming. Somewhere inside the Hollywood success story, there is also a young athlete who never got to see what might have happened if his body had held together a little longer. And maybe that is what makes Kurt Russell's adult career feel so different from other former child stars. He did not simply grow up on camera. He rebuilt himself after a private ending. After baseball was gone, he returned to acting and made one of the most difficult transitions in the industry. From child performer to credible adult leading man. His performance as Elvis Presley in the 1979 TV film Elvis earned him a Primetime Emmy nomination, and that role opened the door to a tougher, more magnetic screen identity. Then came the collaborations with John Carpenter, including Escape from New York and The Thing. Films that did not just make him famous again, but remade him into something cooler, stranger, and harder to forget. Later, Big Trouble in Little China and Tombstone helped turn that image into legend. And then, there is the love story people never stopped watching. Kurt Russell and Goldie Hawn first met in the 1960s on a Disney set, then reunited years later, while making Swing Shift in 1983. They became one of Hollywood's longest-lasting couples, famously choosing not to marry while building a life that outlasted countless official marriages around them. In 2023, Hawn said part of the reason they never married was to preserve that sense of independence and daily choice. That decision, whether people understood it or not, became part of their mythology. They were not trying to look traditional. They were trying to last. And somehow, against the odds of Hollywood, they did. That is why the phrase, "What happened to Kurt Russell?" lands differently when you look closely. What happened is not a collapse. What happened is life. The child star became a man. The athlete lost his other dream. The actor kept evolving. The rebel hero became an elder statesman. The romantic lead became half of one of the last truly iconic old Hollywood love stories still standing. In 2017, he and Goldie Hawn were honored with side-by-side stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame. In 2025, they were still walking major red carpets together. And in 2026, Russell remained connected to a major television franchise, sharing the role of Lee Shaw across generations with his son, Wyatt Russell. That is not the story of a man who disappeared. It is the story of a man who outlived nearly every version of himself. Maybe that is the real reason people feel emotional when they see Kurt Russell now. Not because he looks tragic, not because he needs pity, but because he reminds us of something uncomfortable and deeply human. Even the strongest men do not escape time. They just carry it differently. And in Russell's case, he carries it with the face of a man who has been famous almost his entire life, who lost one dream and built another, who found love without ceremony, and who somehow reached 75 without turning into a parody of his own legend. That is not the loud heartbreak of scandal. It is the quiet heartbreak of endurance. If the first heartbreak in Kurt Russell's life was the dream that ended on a baseball field, then the second was something even quieter. It was the slow realization that no matter how iconic a man becomes, he cannot hold on to every version of home forever. Because for Kurt Russell, home was never just Hollywood. It was family. It was the game. It was the old codes of loyalty, work, and masculinity that came from his father, Bing Russell, a working actor who also became the owner of the independent Portland Mavericks. Kurt didn't just grow up around movie sets. He grew up around a father who treated baseball like a religion and second chances like a duty. Even after Kurt's own injury ended his path on the field, he still spent time with the Mavericks, the team his father built into a cult legend. Years later, that strange, beautiful chapter of their lives would be remembered in The Battered Bastards of Baseball. And maybe that is where the emotion around Kurt Russell really lives. Not in some fake tabloid tragedy, but in the tenderness of inheritance. Because when you watch a man like Kurt Russell at 75, you are not just watching a star grow old. You are watching a son carry the voices of men who shaped him, the discipline of a father, the toughness of a generation that did not explain itself, the pressure of becoming successful early and somehow staying human anyway. There is a loneliness that often comes with surviving your era. The people who knew you before the legend get fewer. The rooms get quieter. The applause may still come, but it no longer sounds like the world you started in. Kurt Russell's face now carries that kind of history, not defeat. History. And history can be heartbreaking when it shows up in the eyes before it ever reaches the words. Then there is Goldie Hawn. And the reason this story hits people harder than they expect. Because in a town built on reinvention, they became the rare couple who did not keep selling a fantasy. They simply kept choosing each other. They first met in the 1960s, reunited while making Swing Shift in 1983, and built a life that has lasted more than 4 decades without the formal machinery of marriage. By March 2025, they were still appearing together in public, including at the Oscars, and recent reporting has described the quiet life they built around family, long-held homes, and the Colorado Lodge they have cherished for decades. That kind of love does not make as much noise as scandal, but in the long run, it is far more moving, because the older they get, the more their relationship stops looking glamorous and starts looking brave. And perhaps the most emotional image of all is this. Kurt Russell now exists in a phase of life where the past literally stands beside him in the form of his son. In Monarch, Legacy of Monsters, Kurt Russell plays Lee Shaw, while Wyatt Russell plays the younger version of the same character. That is not just clever casting, that is time becoming visible. It is one generation handing its face, its posture, its rhythms to the next. Apple's own materials for the series place both father and son in that shared role, and by the 27th of February 2026, Season 2 had already premiered. There is something almost painful about that if you stop and think about it long enough, because every parent reaches a moment when legacy is no longer abstract. One day, your child is not walking behind you anymore. He is walking into the frame with you. That is why the question, "What happened to Kurt Russell?" has a different answer than people expect. What happened is that the reckless young man became a keeper of memory. The Disney kid, Walt Disney, once signed to an exclusive contract, became a screen survivor. The minor league ballplayer became a Hollywood icon. The action star became an elder. The romantic lead became half of one of the last enduring love stories of old Hollywood. In 2017, he and Goldie Hawn received neighboring stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, a strangely perfect symbol for the life they built. Separate names, side by side, still there. And that is where the tears come from. Not because Kurt Russell has been exposed, not because he has collapsed, but because he represents something people are afraid to lose. A type of movie star, a type of man, a type of romance, a type of American myth built from grit, charm, privacy, and endurance. At 75, he does not look like a tragedy. He looks like the final chapter of an era that knows it cannot last forever. And sometimes that is sadder than any scandal could ever be. There is a moment that comes for every legend when the audience stops asking, "Can he still do it?" and starts asking something far more emotional. What does he mean to us now? That is where Kurt Russell stands at 75. He is no longer just the swagger, the grin, the voice, or the action star silhouette that once made him feel untouchable. He has become a living reminder of continuity. Born on the 17th of March 1951, Russell now carries more than fame. He carries an entire cinematic memory that stretches from the old Disney system to modern prestige streaming. A span so long that it almost feels impossible when you say it out loud. And maybe that is why seeing him now affects people more deeply than they expect. Because Kurt Russell is not merely aging in public. He is aging with dignity in an industry that usually punishes age unless it can turn it into a gimmick. The real emotion is not that he looks fragile, it is that he looks real. He looks like a man who has traveled all the way through boyhood fame, adult reinvention, cult status, mainstream success, fatherhood, long-term love, and late career relevance without losing the gravity that made people trust him on screen in the first place. That emotional reading is an inference, but it fits the arc documented by his decades-long career, and his current work still reaching major audiences through Monarch: Legacy of Monsters. What happened to Kurt Russell, then, is not a sensational collapse. What happened is that the man outlasted the myth. The Disney child actor signed during the studio era became the performer who could move through westerns, thrillers, science fiction, and action films while still feeling unmistakably like himself. That kind of longevity is rare. And rare things always become emotional when you realize they cannot last forever. Every public appearance starts to feel like a document. Every smile beside Goldie Hawn starts to feel like a surviving piece of old Hollywood tenderness that somehow escaped the machinery that destroys almost everything around it. That feeling becomes even stronger when you place him beside Wyatt Russell. In Monarch: Legacy of Monsters, father and son portray different generations of the same character, Lee Shaw. On paper, that is just an elegant casting decision. In emotional terms, it is far more than that. It is time made visible. It is the older face and the younger face sharing the same fictional identity, almost like a meditation on inheritance itself. Apple's official materials explicitly frame the role that way, with Kurt Russell and Wyatt Russell playing Lee Shaw across two eras. And Apple confirmed Season 2 premiered on the 27th of February, 2026. Then there is Goldie Hawn, which is where the story turns from reflective to quietly devastating. Their relationship has lasted for more than 40 years, and in 2025, they were still appearing together publicly, including on the Oscars' red carpet. That kind of endurance changes the way people see them. They are no longer just a celebrity couple. They have become a symbol of something people worry is disappearing. Loyalty without performance, commitment without spectacle, and affection that still looks warm after decades of public scrutiny. When audiences feel themselves getting emotional at the sight of Kurt Russell today, part of what they are responding to is not only him, but the vanishing world he seems to bring with him whenever the two of them step into frame together. So the saddest truth is not that something terrible happened to Kurt Russell. It is that nothing dramatic had to happen at all. Time is enough. Time took the boyhood. Time took the alternate life he might have had. Time turned the rebel into an elder, the leading man into a legacy figure, and the icon into a reminder that even the strongest screen presences eventually become witnesses to their own era passing away. That is why people feel the sting when they look at him now. They are not just looking at Kurt Russell, they are looking at the distance between who they once were and who they are now. That is the kind of heartbreak no tabloid can manufacture, because it belongs as much to the audience as it does to the star. The facts of his age, his current public appearances, and his ongoing acting work are clear. The ache those facts create is the deeper human inference. The hardest part of growing older is not the wrinkles, the slower walk, or even the silence that starts to replace the noise. The hardest part is becoming a witness to your own disappearing world. And that may be the most emotional truth about Kurt Russell at 75. He is one of the last men standing from a version of Hollywood that felt harder, stranger, less managed, and somehow more human. A world of practical effects, cigarette-scarred scripts, late-night rewrites, dusty sets, and movie stars who did not need to explain themselves every 5 minutes to remain interesting. When people look at Kurt Russell now, they are not just seeing a man, they are seeing the fading outline of an era. That is why his face carries so much weight now. Not because it is broken, but because it remembers. It remembers the studio system's final echoes. It remembers the child star years, when adults made decisions, and children simply learned how to survive inside the machine. It remembers the movies that became cult scripture for people who grew up believing heroes did not need to be perfect to be unforgettable. And perhaps most painfully, it remembers what it cost to keep going. Not in some explosive, headline-grabbing way, but in the quieter ways that define a real life. The dreams that changed shape. The friends and collaborators who are no longer here. The versions of himself the public loved, then outgrew, then rediscovered years later with new reverence. There is something deeply moving about a man reaching this stage of life without begging the world to keep looking at him. Kurt Russell does not seem desperate to chase youth, to perform relevance, or to inflate his own mythology. That restraint is part of what makes him so affecting now. In a culture obsessed with visibility, there is almost something noble about a legend who does not shout. He does not need to. His presence does the work. It tells the audience that survival is its own kind of performance, and sometimes the strongest thing a person can do is simply remain fully himself, while everything around him changes beyond recognition. And then there is the private sadness that always lingers behind long lives, especially the lives of men the public once imagined as invincible. Because the world rarely allows room for older men to be seen as tender. They are expected to be either iron-willed monuments or fading shadows. But the truth is usually more complicated. At 75, Kurt Russell feels emotional to people because he stands somewhere between those extremes. He is still solid, still recognizable, still carrying that unmistakable gravity. But he also carries the softness that only time can force into a person. The softness of experience, the softness of memory, the softness of knowing that no matter how strong you once were, the years always collect their debt. That may be why audiences feel a lump in their throat when they see him beside Goldie Hawn. Together, they do not represent the fantasy of eternal youth. They represent something far more meaningful: endurance without illusion. They look like two people who have lived enough life to know what matters and what does not. And there is something almost unbearable about that kind of love when viewed from the outside. Because it reminds people how rare it is, not just in Hollywood, anywhere. To still have someone beside you after decades of change, aging, reinvention, disappointment, and survival that is not glamour anymore, that is grace. So what happened to Kurt Russell? He became real in a way that legends rarely do. He became older, deeper, quieter, and somehow more powerful because of it. He became the kind of man whose story no longer needs scandal to move people. And perhaps that is the saddest, most beautiful part of all. At 75, Kurt Russell does not make people emotional because he looks destroyed. He makes people emotional because he does not. He is still here, still standing, still carrying the long weight of a life the world has watched for decades. And sometimes, seeing someone endure is far more heartbreaking than seeing them fall. Maybe that is the final twist in Kurt Russell's story. For decades, audiences were trained to look at men like him and see certainty, strength, cool, control. He was the kind of actor who could walk into a frame and make chaos feel manageable, the kind of presence that made danger look almost poetic. But age has a way of revealing what performance was always hiding. Not weakness, exactly. Something more human than weakness. Vulnerability. The quiet understanding that no one, no matter how iconic, outruns time. And yet Kurt Russell's life does not feel tragic in the cheap way the internet likes to package people. It feels tragic in the older, deeper sense of the word. Tragic because everything beautiful is temporary. Tragic because even the most enduring love story still lives under the shadow of time. Tragic because a man can build a career that spans generations, survive the collapse of one dream, protect the privacy of his personal life, keep his dignity in an industry built to strip it away, and still arrive at a place where the audience looks at him and feels the ache of impermanence anyway. That is why the image of Kurt Russell now hits so hard. It is not just about him. It is about what he reflects back to the people watching. He reminds them of Saturday nights, old movie posters, VHS tapes, cable reruns, drive-in myths, and a version of masculinity that was flawed but steady, rugged but not empty. He reminds them of parents who are gone, summers that will never come back, and the strange pain of realizing that the faces who once guided you through fiction have become elders right in front of your eyes. When people say, "Try not to cry when you see this," what they often mean is something far more personal. Try not to cry when you realize time has touched someone you thought would remain unchanged forever. And perhaps the most powerful thing about Kurt Russell is that he does not seem to fight that truth. He wears age the way some men wear old leather, not polished into something artificial, but marked, lived in, honest. There is dignity in that. There is beauty in that too. In a world that keeps trying to turn aging into failure, Kurt Russell makes it look like character. Not the kind written in a screenplay. The kind earned over years of surviving disappointment, protecting love, raising a family, and learning how to remain visible without giving away everything that matters. So no, what happened to Kurt Russell is not the kind of story built for cruel headlines. He did not become a scandal. He did not become a cautionary tale. He became something rarer. He became a man whose life now moves people not because it exploded, but because it endured. And maybe that is why seeing him at 75 feels so emotional. Because he stands at the edge of memory and the present at the same time. Still recognizable, still strong, still carrying that old unmistakable presence, but also carrying the tenderness of a man who has lived long enough to understand what cannot be kept forever. In the end, Kurt Russell's story is not really about heartbreak. It is about survival. It is about love that lasted. It is about dreams that changed shape. It is about a legend who never needed to be loud to remain unforgettable. And that is what makes it so hard to look away. There is a reason stories like Kurt Russell's stay with people long after the credits should have rolled. It is not because they are full of shocking twists. It is because they reveal a truth most people spend their whole lives trying not to face. The people we admire do not remain frozen in the form we first loved. They age, they soften, they disappear, little by little, from the mythology we built around them. And when they do, we are forced to confront something painful inside ourselves. We were aging too. Kurt Russell once represented motion, action, defiance. The man who pushed forward, stared danger down, and never seemed interested in asking permission from anyone. That image became part of American movie culture for a reason. He had that rare quality that cannot be taught, the feeling that he belonged in front of a camera without needing to prove it. He was never just acting tough. He made toughness feel natural, almost accidental, as if it had simply grown into him over time. But now, at this later stage of life, what moves people is not that old power alone. It is the contrast between what he was and what he has become, not less, but deeper. Because age does that to certain men. It strips away the noise and leaves only essence. And in Kurt Russell's case, what remains is something almost impossible to fake. Steadiness, history, presence. When younger stars try to create mystery, it often feels manufactured. When older legends carry it, it feels earned. That is why seeing Kurt Russell today can feel unexpectedly overwhelming. He is not performing nostalgia. He is living beyond it. He is what remains after fame has burned off all the unnecessary parts and left behind only the man. And maybe that is why his story feels so sorrowful in such a quiet way. Not because the end has come, but because the ending is visible now in the distance, as it is for all of us. There is no cruelty in saying that. There is only honesty. Every time audiences see a figure like Kurt Russell still standing, still carrying himself with that unmistakable weight, they are witnessing something fragile, disguised as strength. Not fragile because he is weak, fragile because every living legacy is fragile. Every final chapter is. That is what makes the image of him so powerful now. He does not look like someone begging to remain relevant. He looks like someone who already knows relevance is the least interesting thing about a life. What matters is what lasted. What matters is what survived when the noise went away. The career lasted. The respect lasted. The love lasted. The sense of self, somehow, lasted. And in an age where almost everything feels disposable, that kind of endurance can hit the heart harder than any scandal ever could. So when people ask what happened to Kurt Russell, maybe the truest answer is this: life happened. Time happened. Love happened. Loss happened. Memory happened. And through all of it, he remained recognizably himself. That is why people get emotional, not because they are looking at a broken man, but because they are looking at one of the rare few who made it through the fire of fame and came out with something intact. Older? Yes. Quieter? Yes. More vulnerable? Certainly. But intact. And sometimes, that is the most heartbreaking sight of all. Not watching a legend fall, but watching him remain human all the way to the end of the myth. In the end, the saddest stories are rarely the loudest ones. They are not always built from scandal, collapse, or disgrace. Sometimes they are built from something much quieter. A man reaching the point in life where his very presence reminds people of everything that cannot be held onto forever. And that is the feeling Kurt Russell carries now. Not disaster, not ruin. Something more difficult to name, and therefore far more powerful, the ache of permanence slipping into memory. For so many years, he represented a kind of masculine certainty that audiences trusted instinctively. He did not feel manufactured. He felt grounded, solid. The kind of actor who seemed to belong to an America of worn denim, open roads, rough edges, and men who did not say too much because their faces already told the story. That image mattered. It stayed with people. And now, seeing that same man at 75, still standing but undeniably touched by time, creates a kind of emotional collision in the viewer's mind. The legend is still there, but now the humanity is impossible to ignore. And maybe that is the real reason people struggle not to cry when they look at him now, because Kurt Russell no longer feels like just a movie star. He feels like evidence. Evidence that beauty fades. Evidence that strength changes form. Evidence that even the most unforgettable faces eventually become mirrors, reflecting back our own fear of aging, of loss, of endings, of time moving faster than the heart is ever ready to accept. Yet there is also something deeply beautiful in that, because if age reveals mortality, it also reveals truth. And the truth in Kurt Russell's life is not one of failure, it is one of endurance. He endured the ending of one dream and built another. He endured the transformations of Hollywood without becoming a hollow imitation of himself. He endured long enough to become not just a star, but a symbol of continuity. A rare figure who still carries the emotional weight of an older world without seeming trapped inside it. That is why this story lands so hard in the final moments. Not because something shocking happened to Kurt Russell, but because something inevitable did. He became older. He became reflective. He became one of the last surviving connections to a kind of screen presence people are no longer sure will ever come back. And when audiences feel their throat tighten at the sight of him now, what they are really mourning is not only the passing of youth, they are mourning the passing of an era, a rhythm, a kind of grace that feels harder and harder to find. So what happened to Kurt Russell? He lived, he loved, he lost, he endured, he stayed, and in doing so, he became more moving than he ever was in the height of his invincibility. Because sometimes the most heartbreaking thing you can witness is not a legend collapsing under the weight of life. It is a legend carrying that weight with quiet dignity until he becomes something even greater than a myth. He becomes human.